further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Kate McCauley.
Thanks, Kavanshi. Good, so I'm making a mess here. Anybody who knows me knows I really don't need this, but Kim was really begging us to wear it, so I will. My little timer on. So tonight, I've been asked to speak about the effects of alcohol, drugs, prescription drugs on the brain, and I have 10 minutes to do that. So it's going to be quick. But the other part is that really what my passion is talking about, thinking about relationships with teenagers. And the teenage brain is just so fascinating. And I sort of subtitled my little 10 minutes here as what we know now and why it's different. One of the things that I like to explain a lot is that the digital age has had an amazing impact, particularly on what we know. Back when I was a teenager, and even when Sally was a teenager, which was long after I was a teenager, there was a lot that we didn't know about brain development. And in fact, what we used to do to understand brain development is look at brains. And so we had to wait until people were dead, and we take them out and we look at them. And when we looked at an 11-year-old's brain and we looked at a 40-year-old's brain, their brains were very close in size. And so what a lot of the thinking was back when we were growing up is that the only difference between an adult brain and a teen brain was experience. And that without having these, it was experiences that we needed to gain in order to be able to have our brains working like adults. What we know now is so vastly different than that. And what we know now is through the magnetic fMRIs, functional magnetic resonance imaging. And so we now know that, in fact, the adolescent brain is quite different than an adult brain. And it's different in a variety of ways. Now, I'm going to tell you that tonight, most of what I'm going to be talking about, and again, for only now 8 minutes, comes from 2 different books. I couldn't find one of them. I apparently have lent it out. But this is called Brainstorm by Dan Siegel. The other one that I recommend is a book called The Teen Brain by Frances Jensen. Both Dan Siegel and Frances Jensen are very, very, you can find them all over the internet. So you just put their names in. Frances, it's the female Frances, so Frances, but they've done lots of different talks about the teen brain. Frances Jensen is actually a neuroscientist, and she comes at it from her work looking at children with epilepsy. But all of that being said, what I want to do is I want to talk about 3 different things related to teen brain development. The first is that that what we know is that when we introduce this developing brain, and I think everybody knows now, how long does it take until the brain is fully developed? 25. So this whole time when we're looking at both our high school students and our college students, the brain is continuing to develop. The problem is when we introduce these other substances to the brain, what we're finding out is that it is having long-term and permanent impact. So when we introduce alcohol with any regular usage to an adolescent brain, what we're seeing is much higher rates of addiction, both in adolescence but also later in life. In fact, I like to quote Debbie Taylor, who is the vice president for Phoenix Houses of the Mid-Atlantic. And one of the things that she tells us is that they do not have people coming in for treatment for addiction who started drinking after they were 21. That where the vast majority of the addictions that we see come from, it comes from early exposure to alcohol use. And so one of the things that hopefully, as we talk about this tonight, that we're really thinking about is how long can we get our kids to postpone alcohol use? Ideally, it would be 25. Our legal system doesn't even ask us to wait that long. And what culturally we know is that lots and lots of parents still think, well, I drank when I was a kid. It's a rite of passage. But in fact, we've got good data now coming out of the partnership that fewer and fewer kids are drinking, and that it is possible for our children to stay alcohol and drug-free all the way through high school when we engage with them appropriately. So the risk of addiction is significant when we're introducing alcohol. We also see that the choices that kids make in terms of relationships and friendships are much more related to access to alcohol once they sort of get engaged in that culture. I want to talk about marijuana a little bit because that is our second most popular drug in Arlington. And we have not for a long time had a lot of information because in fact we didn't research marijuana. But now there's more and more research coming out, and there are a couple of things that I think are significant that we've seen. There was a study that came out of New Zealand. It was done in conjunction with Duke University, and it was looking at IQ points for people who use marijuana. And what's really interesting and why this speaks to the teen developing brain is that what they found is that there is up to an 8-point IQ loss for kids who smoke marijuana regularly. 8 points may not sound like a lot, but let me just say that when you get below 90, now we're starting to look at kids who are delayed and need additional assistance. I'm freaking out when I look at you, our psychiatrist in the room. So anyway, so we see that there's a drop in IQ points. That is a significant drop. Now, what we've also discovered is that when you're using marijuana and when you're using marijuana as a teenager, those IQ points aren't recovered. If you start getting high later in life, you will also see a dip in IQ points. What you will see though, if you start getting high later in life, not that I'm encouraging anybody to do that, is that when you quit smoking, you will recover those IQ points. But if you're doing it as an adolescent, you don't recover the IQ points. So that's one of the issues related to marijuana use. The other issue is related to the onset of psychosis. And one of the things that we know is that, in fact, kids who may be at risk for psychosis, in fact, marijuana is one of the things that attracts them. But what we know is that there are now stronger and stronger connections with the onset of using marijuana and hastening the onset of psychosis, and also strengthening the effects of the psychosis. So if there's any history of schizophrenia or any other psychotic, bipolar disorder or any other kind of psychotic family history, that's one of the things that you really want to be quite sensitive to. And again, the more, everything that we can do to encourage our kids to postpone or not use at all, the better off we are. Now I want to say a couple of things that we know about the developing brain in my last 2.5 minutes. That we know is that part of what's happening in the teen brain is this intense novelty seeking that occurs. Teenagers more so than when they were little, and when they're adults, teenagers much more are looking for new opportunities, new ways to stimulate their brains, new things to do. They're really creative. How many times have you talked about or seen a teenager come up with really some very creative way to skip school, and you're like, well, if only they would put that creativity to good. But we know that kids are looking for that, and that their brains want to be stimulated. That's why alcohol and drugs are so attractive to them. The last thing I want to say real quickly is how many of you have ever been in a situation where you found yourself leaving, if it was a stressful situation, you found that you left it, and then you thought of all the things that you would have, could have, should have said. Like you're driving away and you're like, oh, I could have said this, I should have said that, blah, 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 blah. So that's a distinction that I want to make between something that's called hot and cold cognition. Hot and cold cognition speaks to what the emotional experience is when you're in a situation. So the cold situation is when you're driving away and you're thinking of all of the things that you would have, should have, could have done. The hot one is when there's emotional intensity. So one of the things that we do is we frequently sit with our kids and we talk to them about ways that they can resist using drugs or alcohol, ways that they can turn it down, ways that they can avoid it, all of that kind of thing. What kind of a situation is that, hot or cold? Cold. And very frequently when we're talking to kids about this, the kids are saying, yeah, no, this is what I want to say. I do want to say no thanks. When they get in the situation where they're being offered alcohol adults. Just think about what that's like for our teenagers, who are also trying to figure out how to fit in and stand out and understand where their place is within the social fabric of their schools and the places that they are. So that was like a really short, but I'll answer any questions later. Okay?